So welcome to this Cycling Life. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Rebecca Eliot, who works in business development for ProTouch Sports. ProTouch Sports is a very interesting organization because what it is all about is supporting and enabling African athletes to make it onto the world stage. But I'm going to allow Rebecca to say a little bit more about herself and what she does over the course of the interview. So Rebecca, welcome to the show. Maybe you can just start off by talking a little bit about yourself, how you've come this path into the world of sport and certainly into the world of road cycling.
Okay, well, thank you, Jamie, for having me. Yes, sure. Spent best part of the last 30 years really in my own business, primarily in entrepreneurial organizations. I started out as part of a startup team for a very large loyalty and rewards program here in South Africa called My School, and that took me on a journey through all the major retailers as well as financial services businesses, and really gave me a lot of insight into marketing strategy, building technology, databases, data analytics, etc. So that's really my background, primarily consulting, strategy, design, etc. Got involved in cycling actually through one of my children. I am a mom of four, three boys and a girl, all in their sort of 20s now, but my third son is a professional cyclist. He started out in the MTN Quebec Academy when he was 16. And at the end of that year was when Doug took the team internationally. So the academy closed down here in terms of the younger riders. He then moved across into the Europcar Academy. And I think that was the year that Europcar also pulled out internationally from cycling and moved into football. So he was now moving into the first year under 23 category. And he, together with three or four of his friends, just didn't really have any teams to go into. So they sort of got together and started a team. And that was really the start of ProTouch. So that was 2016.
Wow. Okay. And we've had Doug on the show, of course, who's incredibly passionate about what he has done and is still trying to do for African cycling. And for you, I mean, as a family, was sort of cycling part of your DNA? Was it that your husband or your parents or yourself? I mean, was that there, or was it something that the kids discovered on their own?
No, so my husband does do a bit of mountain biking and a bit of road cycling. I certainly don't do anything near a bicycle, other than helping to support the team. But so, my son got involved in cycling through my husband and his friends that were riding. And actually through James Lauter was how he actually got into the MTN Quebec team. And my husband knew James through some other business connections and networking that he'd been involved in. So that's really how we got involved in cycling itself. I don't think back in 2016 we ever thought that we'd be sitting in 2021 with a continental team, and certainly not the top ranked continental team in Africa. I think at 2016 level, it was very much around just keeping these boys riding their bikes and helping with a bit of race entries and some kit and a few things along the way. By 2017, they were already starting to do incredibly well. Tony Harding, who's a sort of a name in his own right here in South Africa. He's done a number of world champs, a number of Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games. He's been involved with Robbie Hunter, with Chris Froome, and a variety of riders over many, many years. And he started managing the team, and they really started doing incredibly well through 2017. And I think that was really the start for us of starting to see whether or not we should actually be putting something together a little bit more structured.
Yep.
So we started investigating, sending riders over to Europe. We based 12 riders in Belgium for about 6 weeks, where they went and rode a variety of different races, partly as a federation team in order to actually get some experience. And then on returning, we really just started to realize that the local market in South Africa in terms of eventing is very much aimed at the mass participation events. It's really not aimed at setting any young professional or budding professional to operate or perform at the level that is required internationally. I mean, they're doing 100-kilometer races, and really the speed is just not where it needed to be. So that was really when we started exploring the opportunity of a continental team during 2018. At the end of 2018, we actually went and did the Tour of Rwanda. It was our first international UCI race as ProTouch. At that point, we weren't yet a continental team, but we were able to actually access an invite.
And how did you go with that? With just in terms of because getting a team off the ground, I think people really don't I think people underestimate, how incredibly challenging that is. So, getting that sort of pro-continental team off the ground in, Africa. I mean, how did you approach, sponsors, and what was the proposition to them? Of course, in Australia, we've had Green Edge in its various different iterations, supported by the incredible Jerry Ryan. And Jerry is in just so passionate about cycling, but in many ways he has almost single-handedly bankrolled, supported that team over the years. What was your approach, and how did you go about finding potential supporters?
Well, look, ours was a very similar one. Unfortunately, we're not quite in the same level of income, I don't think, that Jerry is. So we're very much what we like to call a lean startup in terms of a team. In terms of sponsorships, we walked the journey of many, many corporate, and through the type of work that I've been doing over the years, I have a fairly big network within corporate. But we were just finding it was so difficult. After your 50th meeting, you sort of lose your sense of humor trying to sell this concept of, come and sponsor my team, that I actually sort of turned it on its head and said, right, I'm not doing this anymore. I'll rather take on more consulting projects in my own business and then use the money that I generate from running that business to actually fund what we're trying to do. So, we do have bikes and wheels and handlebars and helmets and glasses and kit and nutrition sponsored. So the physical running of the things that the physical riders need are pretty much sponsored. We have a number of private investors and individuals, either people who've been connected to us through business or through, a passion for cycling, but we're still the majority funders in terms of the team itself. Obviously a continental team doesn't have necessarily the minimum salaries that the Pro Conti and the World Tour teams do. So, we are able to run this team on a lot less of a budget than typically Green Edge cycling or Quebec ASOS would have to run. And also just in terms of numbers, we can have a minimum of 10 riders going up, I think, to 16. We obviously don't have as many races. I mean, in 2019, I think we did 25 UCI tours. Last year we did 5, and then we got obviously hit by COVID. So it's obviously a lot less. And also we are based still in South Africa. So the riders still live here, and then we just travel to the various races.
And how do you, I guess, as a team? I mean, on one side, of course, is the funding and the building of the structure of a team. But then on the other side, of course, there is the whole aspect related to athletes and high performance and not just the identification, but development of talent. And how have you approached that? Because I guess also when you talk about Africa as a continent, there, as we've seen with ASOS Quebec, there is incredible talent. But there is also quite some big gaps in terms of social and economic opportunity that you confront as well. So in the case of ASOS Quebec, obviously they've had a very, very strong, drive towards trying to bring in and address some of those sort of socioeconomic issues with giving riders opportunities that may not otherwise have had those opportunities. How have you looked at that? And of course, there's always then that question also of how you balance, the need to develop with also the need to compete.
100%. So a lot of our focus really has been on ProTouch Sports really enabling the riders from a logistical infrastructure and managing the physical team at a race level. All of our riders actually have their own coaches, and in some cases 3 or 4 of them have the same coach. So our sports director, Tony Harding, is in regular contact with the various coaches, and they're obviously then aware of our calendar, what we're working to, etc. But at this moment in time, we don't centralize the coaching. We obviously have uploads of training peaks centrally, but in terms of the individual riders, they have been allowed to continue with the coaches that they are comfortable with and have used. So from a performance point of view, it's almost managed at an individual level by the individual coaches together with our sports director. A lot of my focus has really been on the back end logistics infrastructure, finalizing plans, getting race entries and invites. In 2019, we did a lot of the Asia circuit, and Asia was great for us because there are start fees. So, getting to the races was much, cheaper for us. We did a stint in Europe over Poland and Portugal, and that was incredibly expensive for us because obviously we had to get ourselves around, put ourselves into accommodation. We didn't have access to team cars and buses, so we had to hire a lot of that, and there were no start fees, and because the gap still was very big between our level of riders or team, and what was happening on the European side, we weren't necessarily earning any UCI points or any prize money. So but we needed to have the stint in Europe to be able to just start to see whether we're progressing or moving forward. I think in terms of funding on a sort of more permanent basis, we've really turned the model on its head and said, the old model of just trying to get sponsors and trying to sell some form of return on investment is just not there. Yeah. And, when you compare it to other sports that have ticketing and stadium and broadcast fees and, all the other revenue streams, merchandise that, come along, we feel that cycling for some reason just hasn't evolved, not just here in Africa, but worldwide. And I mean, the fact that Doug was left.
And what's so in terms of like questioning that, and of course this is a topic that on TCL we often come to, that there's so many challenges with the existing financial model behind professional cycling, and yet it seems that we haven't seen too many really progressive or innovative models or approaches to address that. So Rebecca, where's your thinking heading on that, and where would you see maybe 3 to 5 years down the line where we could see some creativity or new approaches to thinking about that?
With respect to everybody in the cycling industry, I think a lot of it comes from the teams currently are still managed by people who've come through the historical or the traditional way. So it's kind of, everybody just carries on doing it the way it was done, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, etc. I think that the advantage we possibly have coming from a more business background and not coming from traditional cycling is that we were able to look at it more as a business and say, okay, are we just going to run a team and call it whatever the sponsor's name is, or are we going to come up with our own brand, build an African sports brand, and then start to build an ecosystem around the team that is actually what ultimately supports it. Yeah. So, we've kind of built a sort of focus that said, right, for the last 2 or 3 years, it's been about getting performance and getting our brand known and being taken seriously that we actually can race at a reasonably high level, albeit not at the top end of World Tour or Pro Tour at this point in time, but that we can at least go and achieve on the continental circuit, whether it be the Africa Tour, or Asia Tour, and possibly still have some showing of performance in Europe, albeit that we're not necessarily going to always be on the podium or be on the podium. I think our focus has been very much around how do we build a business around that actually supports what we're trying to do. Yeah. So what we're going to be launching this year, which was planned for last year, but with COVID, we kind of put a few things on ice because the timing just wasn't great. But we have 3 major pushes for this year. The first one is we're launching a fan engagement platform. It will actually go live into the App Store in the next week to 10 days. The App Store or the application itself is called ProTouch Africa. And really what it is a fan engagement platform that aggregates African cycling. So it pulls together all top 15 of the African cycling nations, features every single one of the continental teams, which is the 2 Rwanda teams, the Morocco team, and ourselves. Unfortunately, this year, the Algerian and Angola Conti team that we had last year and the year before folded. So we had expected that there would be 6, but unfortunately, there's only the 4 of us. We've then loaded all of the African riders that are riding now in international teams. So not necessarily at Conti level, in the Pro Tour and in the World Tour. And every rider has its own profile. So if you think of it like LinkedIn.
That's great. And how do we? So this is an app which is forthcoming, so we'll be able to download it soon.
Yeah, it's in test flight at the moment. We're probably going to start releasing to the App Store within the next few days. Okay. And we'll go into soft launch over the next week or so. But I will definitely give you a heads up as soon as it's live.
Yeah, well, let us know. And for those people watching, we'll make sure that we put in the description of the video on YouTube. We'll put the link to the app as well, so people can follow it. But that's an awesome and in a way quite altruistic kind of move, because clearly what you're doing there is building momentum and engagement around African cycling across the board, as opposed to just for your team.
Yeah,
which is unique. I mean, I think, from our side as well, like that's something I'm always intrigued with, like if you think about other sports, there can be a fan who follows Manchester United for 25 years or the Chicago Bulls or whoever it might be. But in cycling, it's almost like every 2 or 3 years, it's all change. You're following Trek Segafredo this year, and who are they going to be next year, or BMC? And I guess that's something to an extent that, a few of the teams like Green Edge, have been able to build consistency in who you're following, but not just consistency in terms of the name of the team, also the culture or the how do I put it, the values of the team.
Yes,
Quick
yes,
Step is probably another good example of a team
100%.
that does that well.
Yeah,
So when you speak about fan engagement, clearly what you're talking about here is fan engagement at a pan-African level and
correct.
different
Yeah.
team riders. But what's your take on this question of fan engagement and the fact that so many teams do become sort of chameleons in a way? They're constantly changing and a moving target for fan engagement.
Well, I think it goes back to the traditional way that it always was. As the team started, it called its name the sponsor's name, and as long as the sponsor was there, the team was there. But as soon as the sponsor fell by the wayside, the team almost had to recreate itself. So I think for fans, what you probably ended up with was more of the starstruck spectator type of fan, which is following an individual rider as opposed to the team itself. Because, the team was now called something else this year, but, the rider is still the rider and he still has the same name. So, I think for us, the fan engagement platform is very much around recognizing African talent, both at a world tour level and all the way down. It's creating opportunities for teams, both national and continental teams, to be able to monetize their brand. So things like we have a fan shop for each of the teams where you could buy the fans, the team's jersey.
So you've pulled that together for all of the team. So
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
So what's quite exciting is each individual athlete has his own profile. If you think of it like LinkedIn, you can connect to all of their social media channels directly. You can see who all their sponsors are and link to their sponsors. You can access their fan shop and actually purchase fan memorabilia. We also have an aggregated social media channel, which brings in all the Instagram, Facebook, Twitter feeds all centrally. So instead of having to go to multiple places, you can actually just see a central feed of content around anything that has to do with African cycling or Africans riding on the world stage. It also has an event component where you can actually feature events and push out, entries. So to try and access the cycling enthusiast that isn't necessarily a pro, but now might be entering a particular race. So we'll start firstly in South Africa for that, but in time we looking to expand that. We have a full e-commerce store where you can buy pretty much everything from tires to bikes to wheels, nutrition, and everything in between.
Wow.
And then on top of that, we've integrated into the app the ability to see all the UCI rankings. So we're hoping to get an API from UCI soon, but for the time being, we've just got a web link out through the app.
You just let me know, Rebecca. I'll give my mate Mick Rogers a call. We'll get that fixed up. Get that fixed up for you. Right?
Yes, I have been chatting to the guys, but I know that they're still in build mode. They're doing a few different things. So we've kind of done a workaround, which kind of requires me to actually export the data into Excel and test my Excel skills dramatically.
But this is really amazing. So this is really, I mean, it's interesting how you're talking about it, because it is it's a new business. It's a new model,
100%.
which is integrating a team as part of a much bigger vision and much bigger picture. So where do you see this heading? I mean, for you, imagining, ProTouch, say 3-5 years from now, what would be your vision in terms of what it will evolve into?
So I think that the narrative that we have now in terms of engaging with brands is very much around being a platform. So our talk is not about, oh, we're a cycling team. Our talk or our narrative now is that ProTouch Africa is a platform to enable African riders. We just happen to have a continental team that is the #1 team in Africa, and the profits that we make from what we're doing is what we actually use to fund our team. I think if I had to say what would our vision be, I mean, our ultimate vision would be to be a Pan-African pro team. I think a World Tour team would probably be a little bit beyond our capability or ability to earn that kind of revenue, certainly in the next 3 to 5 years. But I think certainly within the next 3 to 5 years, we would like to see a Pan-African team made up of a core of South African riders. So, roughly 10 South African riders, and then the balance of the riders made up of riders from Rwanda, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Morocco, etc. So ultimately, I think we want to move ProTouch from a Conti team up into that Pan-African category, taking on, the Asia and Africa tour rides. I mean, we ride actually, interestingly, in Asia and in Africa against Cofidis, Arkea Samsic. There are a number of bigger teams that we do compete against and compete very well. So, that's really where our sort of longer term vision would be. And the fan engagement platform is the start of trying to build that. So that's really our first big thrust for this year. The second one is the broadcast properties. So we've actually started engaging in a number of broadcast properties. We have a tour planned this year, which is called the Capitals Tour, that we will be riding all 9 capitals of every province in South Africa. We're going to be doing that with Ron Rutland. I don't know if you know Ron Rutland. He was the South African who rode through every country in Africa
Wow.
solo.
Okay. Cool. So ultra distance athlete. Cool.
And he's probably more famous for being the guy that actually delivered the Rugby World Cup whistle from Twickenham to Tokyo at the last World Cup. And he's got another trip planned from next year from Tokyo back to Paris for the next Rugby World Cup. So we're going to be doing a joint collaboration broadcast property with him, which will be a 9-part series, recording the team, the behind the scenes, the amazing views of South Africa, the people, and really just experiencing our country from obviously on a bicycle. So that's the first part of our broadcast opportunity. It'll be a 9-part series that'll get featured on television here in South Africa and potentially worldwide as well. And our fan engagement app has the ability to actually publish and live stream as well as broadcast. So we have an OTT platform that allows us to actually distribute that. So that's our sort of second push, which would be starting to move into broadcast properties that we own the content and that we can either on-sell the rights and generate revenue streams in that side of things.
That's ambitious. Now, again, that's in terms of the way teams have worked in the past, that's incredibly innovative and progressive and new, I guess. So you're really breaking some new ground. And have you had, have you had the opportunity to talk to other teams? Have others expressed curiosity or interest in what you're doing, or are you still working a little bit below the radar at the moment?
We've kind of been a little bit below the radar. We've been dealing a lot with the African teams over the last few months, and obviously being in Egypt last week for the African Road Championships, we got to engage, face to face, where prior to that it was lots of these Zoom calls that we're all getting very used to at the moment. So, locally, we only really have club teams, and then we have ProTouch, and then we have Rebecca Eliot. So we are the only Conti team here in South Africa. So while we have a number of South African riders who are featured on the UCI rankings, either from earning points at African Games or, African Champs or SA Champs, none of those riders are riding in international teams. So, to a degree, a South African rider has a choice of either stepping up into a ProTouch or getting himself or herself onto a plane and going to Europe and trying to find their way into a bigger team that way. So, our local sort of club teams that we interact with or race against on the local scene, we certainly have been starting to expose them to what we're doing, because the fans here in South Africa exist within obviously those riders all the way up through, the cycling enthusiasts. And I think because we're going to be starting to feature a lot of the rankings, we will also start to show the local racing. So over the last year, we also built, or actually 2 years ago, we built something called Support SA Talent, which we have as a partnership with Phil Liggett. We run the Phil Liggett Foundation here in South Africa. Phil made me the chairman because he said it was too much admin. The idea behind it was really looking at ways that we could help to fundraise to specifically support South African talent. So what we did with Support SA Talent is, not being an event organizer, we took a series of events across the year, so 30 different events, and we tracked over 1,000 riders, or continuously track 1,000 riders in the junior, under 23 elite, VA and VB and VC categories.
Wow.
Across all of those different races, and very similar to how the UCI do it. We just allocate points based on event. We re-rank the points every week, and at the end of the year, Phil usually comes out and we do a Support SA Talent fundraiser event where we award all the local talent.
That's right. That's amazing.
We do auctions and things like that. So that's how we think we'll engage the cycling enthusiast. We also have things like fantasy games that we're going to look at adding to the app. We're going to be looking at a bit of, the sports betting and those sort of areas. So there's a number of things that are on the sort of the roadmap going forward. I think the starting point is just to get the app started. But
I understand completely. I mean, where you're coming from, Rebecca, because at the end of the day, it's all about engagement, and ultimately the sustainability of a team, whether it's attractiveness to sponsors or attractiveness to potential partners, riders. It actually comes down to the fan base that you're able to sustain and continue, unless you've got, Jerry Ryan knocking on the door. And unfortunately, there's not too many Jerry Ryans out there in the world. So it's really exciting to hear what you're doing, and I'm sure certainly here at TCL we'll be very keen to follow the journey and to hear about how it's evolving for you. And Rebecca, next week, sorry, there's something else you wanted to add?
I was going to say, a lot of the content and reporting or articles that get written about African cycling are always very focused on how tough it is, that African cyclists can't make it onto the world stage, etc. And we've really sort of looked and said, reporting on that isn't helping the problem. It's not solving the problem. Let's rather focus and put our energy into telling the really great stories that people want to engage with, and let's actually start to enable that. So, I think what's important for us is trying to create platforms or people like yourselves who actually can talk about what is being done at a continental level, because I think that very often people focus on trying to fix it at a world tour level where, I think unfortunately it's a little too late there. It almost needs to get fixed now for the future generations. And,
well, look, I think, and you're absolutely right. And I think we should also not underestimate the desire of fans and individuals to connect with youth talent. I mean, if we look at look at college football or in the United States, or, even, the local level football, rugby in countries like, Australia, South Africa, there's massive potential fan and support bases there, which have not really been tapped into in the cycling world up until now. So I think definitely the model's exciting. You have the South African Nationals next week. So how are you feeling about that? And
well, last year we got a third place in the time trial, individual time trial, and the road race. So, and that was behind Daryl Impey and Ryan Gibbons, who's our current national champ, and then on the ITT behind Stefan de Bott. So yes, we're hoping for a podium, hopefully the top step, but let's see. It's going to be interesting. It's a fairly interesting course. We're going down to Swellendam, so it's the double century route. I don't know if you're familiar with that in the Cape. So it's quite lumpy and probably very well suited to a number of our riders. So we've got 10 riders going, so we've got certainly enough support.
Right.
Yes, so we're definitely hoping for a podium. I think coming off the back of African champs, Kent came second in the ITT to Ryan Gibbons. So we're certainly thinking that a time trial podium is on the cards. And on road, Kent came fourth in the African champs behind Ryan.
Fingers crossed. Wishing you all well. I mean, it's certainly an amazing part of the world. I mean, I've cycled extensively through the Cape, and I've ridden the Tour of Good Hope, of course, the Cape Town Cycle Classic many times, and it's really one of the most spectacular parts of the world in which to ride a bike. I really love it. But Rebecca, thanks a lot for your time. Now, of course, the other thing we have to say, and you'll hear it first, is that here at TCL, we've actually invested in and acquired a soon-to-be open hotel and cycling performance centre in the heart of the Flemish Ardennes. There's going to be some information coming about it soon, but we certainly will be a home. We're going to create a special program actually to bring in riders coming from Africa and Asia in particular, to give them an opportunity to race in Belgium. So I really look forward also to talking to you more about that, and to our listeners about how that's also going to involve and expand the TCL community. So Rebecca Eliot, thank you very much for your time, and wishing ProTouch Sports every success at the South African Nationals next week. Thanks again.
Amy, thanks very much. Bye-bye.